Good morning. We're in the second week of our series called Dangerous Prayer. So what's the difference between dangerous prayer and what we could perhaps call safe prayer? Safe prayers are softer prayers. Grace before meals, a child's prayer at bedtime, even the blessing at the end of Mass. Traditional Catholic devotions that we use to worship God or venerate Mary and the saints are also examples. They give expression to faith while providing comfort and encouragement. These prayers can be fundamental to the gradual growth of our spiritual life. But dangerous prayers are different. Dangerous prayers make specific requests to God. When we pray dangerous prayers, we bring very clear petitions to Him. Dangerous prayers search your soul, break your habits, and change your path, and set you in direction of the more that God has in store for you. They are the move mountains, work wonders, and expect miracles type of prayers. Last week, we challenged everyone to identify one dangerous prayer that you could focus on during this series. A prayer that needs God to come through to make it happen. Today, we hear from the 10th chapter of Mark's Gospel. We read about someone's dangerous prayer. They came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a sizable crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind man, the son of Timaeus, sat by the roadside begging. Jesus passes through Jericho, which was considered an ancient city even 2,000 years ago. And a crowd of people are following him. Jesus attracted crowds everywhere he went, crowds full of people who were loud and chaotic as they vied for Jesus' attention. And all this commotion would have drowned out the cries of a poor man begging on the side of the road. Being blind, Bartimaeus was destined for a life of poverty. His only source of income would have come from begging at the busy city gate. On hearing that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." Son of David designates royal status, kingship. It conveys that Bartimaeus knows who Jesus is. Blind Bartimaeus is, it seems, the only one in this whole crowd who recognizes Jesus as Lord and King. Effective prayer, first of all, does exactly that. It recognizes God and acknowledges who God is. Bartimaeus names Christ as King, establishing the whole context for his prayer and what follows, which is a pretty basic prayer. Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me. Pity or mercy. Besides life itself, mercy is the most basic, the most fundamental need that we have before God, and the most fundamental gift we can receive from God. It rights our relationship with God. Bartimaeus' blindness would have been judged as punishment for some serious sin. So his perceived need for mercy would have been great. And to his credit, his prayer boldly names this need. He asks for a right relationship with God. And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. but he kept calling out all the more, "Son of David, have pity on me." So what exactly is he doing? He's persevering in prayer. And he doesn't let the apparent lack of an answer nor the discouraging voice of others stop him or slow him down. In fact, he cries out all the more. Above all, dangerous prayer is persistent prayer that keeps going despite disappointment, that will not be silenced by resistance, that does not lose heart. When you meet resistance to prayer and go ahead and pray anyway, you'll become better at it. You'll become stronger through it. Your prayer will become easier. Make no mistake, meeting and dealing with resistance in prayer is just part of the process. Bartimaeus continues to cry out, and what happens? Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." Amid the chaos and the confusion, Jesus hears Bartimaeus. So whenever you're tempted to think that God doesn't hear, isn't listening, has better things to do, remind yourself of Bartimaeus. So they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take courage, get up, he's calling you." He threw aside his cloak, sprang up, and came to Jesus. Dangerous prayer requires something else which we may not want to do. It requires us to exercise self-sacrifice, personal sacrifice, skin in the game. And that's what happens. Bartimaeus doesn't just come to Jesus, he throws his cloak aside. And think about it for a moment. His cloak was the source of his livelihood. It was how he collected money. Passers-by would toss coins into it. So throwing it aside meant that he was throwing aside that day's wages. He wouldn't eat that day. And he also risked losing his cloak entirely, which could have been a catastrophe for him, that he couldn't afford to buy another one. Yet he sacrifices cloak and coins at Jesus' command. Jesus said to him in reply, "What do you want me to do for you?" Seems like a strange question for Jesus to ask. The guy is blind, and Jesus heals people. So why does Jesus ask him what he wants? Because before we ask God to move, it's very important to have clarity for what specifically we want. As we said at the beginning, dangerous prayer is specific prayer. Safe prayer is general prayer. And here's why. When you make a vague request, it's difficult to know if God has really answered your prayer or not. When you pray, "Bless us, O Lord, and these thy gifts," is the food really blessed? That it looks and tastes the same. However, when you pray very specifically, it's crystal clear whether God answered with a yes or a no, which is risky because you have to accept the fear and the fact that God might very well say no. Jesus asks Bartimaeus what he wants, and Bartimaeus tells him, "Master, I want to see." Everything in their interaction thus far has worked to the successful fulfillment of this specific request. Recognizing the Lord, writing the relationship, persevering in prayer, and exercising self-sacrifice. In the dangerous prayer, affects a miracle. Jesus told him, "Go your way, your faith has saved you." Immediately he received his sight and followed him on the way. It's a nice story. But what does it have to do with us? The same Jesus who healed Bartimaeus back in Jericho still heals. Gospel stories don't just tell us who Jesus was, but who he is. They don't just tell us what he did, but what he does. Healing happens. Pray for a miracle. Be specific. Make it your dangerous prayer.